So last time, everyone, we were discussing, of course, the concepts of federalism and how federalism relates to those relationships that we see with the states and the federal government. So today we're going to mention a couple of more definitions. So last week was kind of very definition heavy. We've got a few more definitions and a few more key terms we're going to discuss today. This chapter has a lot of key terms, and so we're going to focus on a couple of other constitutional concepts such as privileges and immunities, full faith and credit. We're going to take a look at those. We're also going to take a look at the beginnings of federalism, the history of federalism, so to speak, like the traditional federalism where you had that clear separation of duties and responsibilities between the states and the federal government, and they weren't really collaborating on much of anything. And then, of course, we're going to move into where that relationship ended up changing. So with that being said, let me go ahead and share the screen really quickly so that way we can get started here. So again, since I am a little bit under the weather, just if I have to pause a bit, and catch my breath a bit, just please bear with me. Unfortunately, this is the type in teaching. This is not the type of job where you can just kind of just take a like some jobs you can just kind of like yes, you're sick, but you can just kind of just like sit there and just kind of like try to do your work. This is not the type of job that you can really get sick, because unfortunately I have to talk, you know what I mean? So but anyway, it is what it is. So let me go ahead and start the share here really quick, and then we'll get started here. So okay, let's see. Let me get this going. Let's see, where is it? Okay, window. All right. Okay, so let's share this. Okay, so you all should be able to see the PowerPoint here, right? So like I said, we're going to get into full faith and credit, and then we're going to get to privileges and immunities, and I have some scenarios that will kind of make this a little more clearer, right? So we did kind of mention this a little bit last time about how that one of the main purposes of the United States Constitution was to actually unite the states, right? To actually give meaning to the term the United States of America, to unite the states, to not have the states basically operating like 13 different countries, and to allow for there to be respect amongst the states and reciprocity amongst the states. Reciprocity basically means that that what one state is doing is for the most part recognized in other states, right? And that's where the full faith and credit clause comes in, right? So states must recognize or uphold government actions in other states. The Constitution makes the states less like independent countries and more like components of a unified nation, right? And so here's some examples of how this is done through the full faith and credit clause, which is in Article 4, Section 1. So states, Article 4 discusses the states in the Constitution. States are expected to honor public acts and judicial decisions that take place in another state. There is an exception, though. This does not apply if a practice in one state goes against the strong public policy of another state, and the state against the practice is not obligated to recognize it. So let me kind of break this down here for you all and kind of explain this more in detail. So basically what this means is that the states are supposed to recognize what the other states are doing when it comes to like administrative decisions, governmental operations. You don't want to have a situation where, policy that's happening in California when it comes to like health or safety, that it's not going to be recognized like in neighboring Nevada, right? Or even like in other states like Florida and Texas, right? Now, this is for like your more everyday, mundane type of governmental responsibilities. So let me give you all an example here that will kind of make this a little bit, kind of hammer this home a little bit more. So let's say, obviously, of course, we live here in Texas. I'm sure a lot of us drive, right? A lot of us have driver's licenses. And so let's say, and this actually did happen, not the details of the scenario I'm going to give, but I actually did have a cousin of mine who actually had a wedding in Chicago last summer, although I didn't go because I was teaching someone, but my mother went. So let's say, we're driving up to Chicago to go to my cousin's wedding. We get stopped by the Illinois DPS, their version of the state police, because unfortunately, we were speeding, and sometimes it happens, that's why the cruise control is important, although I'm not really too big of a fan of it, but you still have to watch your speed, right? Because it's easy to speed and you don't even know it. So we get pulled over. The police officer there, he sees, he asks, of course, for our information, right? The driver's license and our vehicle registration, all the usual, just to ensure that we are driving legally. So he sees my Texas driver's license and he says, okay, you're from Texas, right? Okay, you're from where those Cowboys play, right? So you realize that you're not in Texas anymore, right? You're in Illinois, where the Bears play, right? So those cheating Astros, right? No, 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 no. You're not in the you're not in Texas anymore, right? You're in Illinois. So this Texas driver's license that you have, it's not valid here because you're not in Texas. So I'm going to cite you for driving without a license. Now, let me ask you all this question. Under full faith and credit, is that allowed? Can they write me up for not having a license, even though it's not an Illinois license? What do y'all think? What do you all think on this? Don't overthink it. It's don't overthink it. What do y'all think? Let's see. Let me check the chat real quickly here. Okay, Elda says no. Okay, why do you say no? Why do you think that why do you think that that's not valid for them to do that? Why do you think that your Texas driver's license is valid in Illinois? Why do you think that is?
I would think because they have to respect the fact that the state of Texas has issued you a driver's license, so they have to reciprocate, with state laws.
Yes, you're exactly right, because is driving in Texas all that different from driving in Illinois? Is it really all that different? Like, aren't the traffic lights the same? The stop sign means the same, right? It's pretty much the same thing, right? So you're exactly right. If you're good enough to get a driver's license in another state, because driving is pretty much the same anywhere you go, then the other state needs to respect that, because if one state felt that you were worthy enough to have a license, then that should be respected in the other state, because again, driving's not all that different. Yes, you're exactly right. So in everyday things like that, the states do have to honor and respect what the other states are doing. Now, of course, that's different if you're moving over there, right? If you're moving, then you have to go get you're going to have to get a driver's license and all that. Let's see, Elda, go ahead.
Oh, but let me ask you this: like the state of California does not require proof of citizenship to get a driver's license, whereas like the state of Arizona and Texas do.
Mhm. Right. So that would go ahead. Go ahead.
How would that work as far as like the validity of a driver's license in states that do require proof of citizenship?
Well, then that goes to what we're talking about here, where it says that there are some exceptions to it, right? That if you have other states that are not going to, because of, the strong public policy, like you mentioned, and that's a great example, right? That if other states would not grant driver's licenses, to non-legal, immigrants, then that would be a situation where, that would be a situation that the states would have to. And again, and there has been some legal discussion on it. Again, this is something that's kind of a gray area. That if, let's say, you're in Texas and you have this California driver's license, but you don't have your official documents. There's a lot of that that's still being kind of debated and discussed and also fought in the courts right now, right? But what you bring up is a good example of how that Texas and Florida do not have to, they don't have to respect what California is doing in that regard, right? So does that kind of make sense? That for that specifically, that would be an example of, because of the strong public policy disagreements. Does that kind of make sense or not really? I'm sorry I couldn't give you like a more forward answer, because that's something that's still being like worked on in the courts. Does that kind of make sense? Or let's see. Just to make sure. Okay, sounds good. Okay. Can you all still see the PowerPoint? Because I shared it in a weird way. It's not the the same way I normally share. Can you all can see it, right?
Yes.
Okay, you all can see it. Okay, good, because I shared it a different way. So, but yeah, so that's a very, very, very good point, right? And that also leads to what we're about to talk about, right? That there are some exceptions to this. Another exception that we had a couple of years ago, this one was a little bit more famous, was many years ago at around, it was in the late 90s when I was hearing about this in the news. I was lame, I was in middle school and I watched the news. I was hearing about how in some of these northern, more liberal states, that they were starting to issue same-sex marriage licenses. Okay, I don't know. This was several years ago, right? This was about 20 years ago when this was happening, right? Where some of these states were starting to recognize same-sex marriage, but the southern, more conservative states were not agreeing to that, right? So that was an example where if, let's say, were of a same-sex couple and you got married in Massachusetts and you moved to Texas, that marriage would not be valid. Now, of course, this all changed with Obergefell v. Hodges, which created marriage equality, where now all the states had to recognize it, but that was through a Supreme Court decision. But that's another example of how that the states don't necessarily have to agree, with all the states, right? And so, of course, this also, again, what does strong public policy count? I mean, it's not very straightforward, right? That's why there's lawsuits that, and that, of course, is what happened with Obergefell v. Hodges, right? Where some of these, these same-sex couples were saying that they disagreed with, with this idea of the strong public policy, right? So again, there's a lot of legal, there's a lot of legal action that goes with some of these things, right? It's not so clear cut, right? So I'm not asking for you to know all the different examples, right? Because, just know that there are situations where the states don't have to recognize everything that the states were doing, and like I mentioned, it's mostly for like the mundane, non-controversial things, right? Traffic lights and stop signs aren't really controversial, right? There's not going to be strong, public debates and public, political debates about those, right? So for mundane, regular governmental operations, that's where we mostly see it, right? We'll talk about Loving v. Virginia in chapter 5 here. We'll also talk, or well, let's kind of go over it right now. Let's kind of discuss it right now. That way, and then we'll see if we can. So talking about Obergefell v. Hodges, like we were saying here. Let's talk a little bit about Loving v. Virginia, right? So in 1952, as many as 30 states prohibited interracial marriage, and many would not recognize the marriage if performed in another state, right? And this, of course, so there's a lot of corollaries between Loving v. Virginia and Obergefell v. Hodges, right? So originally, you had a lot of these states that did not allow for interracial marriage, right? You had state laws that were banning it, right? So in 1967, the Supreme Court addressed the constitutionality of such laws. Mildred and Richard Loving, a black woman and white man, were married in the District of Columbia. However, when they returned to their home state of Virginia, it refused to recognize them as a married couple, right? So this was an example of how, some states at the time were using the full faith and credit clause as a means to not allow for certain marriages that, the politics of that state, the political culture, whatever you want to call it, the public policy of that state did not recognize. That's why they weren't recognizing these these marriages here, because they went against what those states were agreeing with, right? But again, the Supreme Court ruled against the states, and in Loving v. Virginia, overturned state bans on interracial marriage. And we would also see the the same type of the same type of jurisprudence and legal arguments used in the Obergefell v. Hodges case, right? So same-sex marriage had until recently been in the same position as interracial marriage. We had what was called DOMA at the time, Defense of Marriage Act, passed by, the Republicans were in control of Congress at the time, and President Clinton, who was a Democrat but was kind of a centrist Democrat. We had this signed here, in which it declared that states would not have to recognize same-sex marriage from another state, right? So this was a federal law passed at the congressional level that did not allow for for same-sex couples to be able to have their marriage recognized in some of these more conservative states, because again, they had that that went against the public policy of those states, right? So then in 2015, I can't believe it's already going to be 8 years since this happened, right? I vividly remember when this case came up. The U.S. Supreme Court issued a historic ruling in Obergefell v. Hodges. The court ruled that the 14th Amendment guaranteed a fundamental right to same-sex marriage. and required all 50 states to offer marriage licenses to two people of the same sex and recognize same-sex marriages licensed out of state. So we'll talk more into detail about the 14th Amendment in Chapter 5, but basically, since we're on the subject here, basically the 14th Amendment was designed to integrate the newly freed African American former slaves into American society. And in order to do so, they needed to have equality under the law and protection under the law, right? That's what the 14th Amendment guarantees. It basically says that everyone should be treated equally in the eyes of the law, right? That the law should apply equally to everyone, regardless of your race, gender, ethnicity, background. None of that stuff should matter in terms of the way the law should apply equally to everyone. And so in Obergefell v. Hodges, we see that just like what we saw in Loving v. Virginia, right, where people should be able to these laws, saying that people of different races can't get married, were struck down as unconstitutional. We also see the same thing here, where same-sex couples could also now get married because the 14th Amendment, allows for them to have that fundamental right, and things like that. And we'll talk more about the 14th Amendment and how it applies to other cases. We'll talk about it, how it was used in Brown versus Board of Education, Dundas v. Texas. We'll talk about those cases in Chapter 5 here. So I think we'll come back to Obergefell v. Hodges here in a bit. But yeah, so obviously, of course, when we look at this concept of full faith and credit clause, again, there is supposed to be uniformity across the states in terms of what the states do and how they interact with each other, and recognizing what other states are doing. But there are limits to it, right? And again, the courts will step in and try to iron out those details. That's what the courts are for, right? So, okay, let's kind of skip over here really quickly. Let's get to privileges and immunities. Okay, so let's get to Article 4, Section 2. Like I mentioned, Article 4 discusses the states and the Constitution. So, privileges and immunities guarantees that citizens from outside a state enjoy privileges and immunities given to people of that state. A state cannot discriminate against someone from another state or give privileges to its own residents only. Okay. And so with that being said, let's kind of go back to our example here. So, all right. So obviously, of course, I'm pissed off in terms of, getting a ticket for, just because I didn't have an Illinois license, and because I teach government, of course, I know that that's unconstitutional. So, I'm over here upset and pissed off. And so we get to the venue, but there's no parking. So we have to park a ways away, and we have to walk through this kind of shady neighborhood. So we get to the wedding, and we get to the wedding and all that, and then finally we're leaving, and then I see that my car's not there, right? I see some broken glass there where my car was, so somebody stole my car. Okay, and it was a rental car, right? So I'm even like more worried because it's not even mine. So I call the police. The police show up, and then I tell them what happened. I show them my ID, and they're like, "Oh, you're from Texas. You realize this isn't a valid license, right?" And I'm like, yes, somebody already told me. So what can you all do, officer? What can you all do about my my stolen car? And they're like, well, do you realize how dangerous Chicago is? Do you realize how many how many stolen cars, carjackings, do you realize how many we've had to deal with tonight? You're like the 20th car that's been stolen already. So we don't have time to deal with you people from Texas, all right? We got our own problems to deal with here. We got our own, criminal, cases we have to. We don't have time to deal with you people from Texas. So you're just out of luck, okay? So it's your fault for leaving your state, okay? So I know that's kind of like outlandish, and you probably know the answer, right? Can they say that? What do y'all think? I kind of embellished, but can they say that? Can they treat me that way just because I'm not a citizen of Illinois? What do y'all think? I think it's pretty clear, right? Go ahead.
I hope not. I would be
scared
to go somewhere else.
Yes, I would hope not. No. But no. According to privileges and immunities, they're not supposed to do that. I mean, they might joke with you. They might say like, "Oh, like cowboy suck," or whatever. They might say that, but no, they're just because I'm from another state doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that they're not going to go and treat my situation seriously, right? The fact that I'm from another state is irrelevant. A crime happened there, and they need to address it, right? And they need to respond to it with the same type of veracity that they would, any of their own citizens, right? So because right, if I go, if they come to Texas, right, and something happens, here, right, the local authorities need to respond to that, right? It doesn't matter that they're from another state, right? It's because if that did matter, then they would be discriminating against us simply because we're from another state. And again, this is meant as a way to create that uniformity amongst the people of the United States. I mean, you see this even in like other countries, right? Where if let's say you go like to Paris, right, and you're going to the Louvre, and then someone like steals your purse, or they pickpocket you or something like that. The French police are not going to be like, oh, well, you're an American, so we're not going to help you, So no, you still have those rights even in other parts of the world, right? I mean, you have that expectation that if a crime is committed, they need to respond to it, right? So yeah, so privileges and immunities is important because that way it creates this sense of again, it's meant as a way to create more of a unity amongst the people of the United States, so they can go and travel, across the country and not feel that the law treats them differently simply because they're not a citizen of that state, right? So does that make sense in terms of privileges and immunities? Pretty straightforward, right? In terms of, and I know I kind of give these. I always love giving these outlandish examples, but they make sense, right? They're a good way for you all to kind of like understand, how they kind of work, right, or how they're supposed to work, right? So okay, let's go ahead and continue. So local government. Okay, it's interesting that in federal government, this is really the only mention of local government. Again, when you take Texas government, there's a whole chapter on local government. So you'll learn more about that in Texas government. Hold on, let me take a water break. Okay. So local government has no status in the U.S. Constitution because it's not mentioned. Local governments are subject to control by the state. So basically what this means here is that, remember, we talked about a unitary system last week, how a unitary system is basically where the government kind of like the federal government tells the states and local governments what to do. Well, states have unitary systems when it comes to how they treat the local government. So federalism only applies between the federal government and the states, right? The states can tell the local governments what to do. So an example of this would be, I like to use this example in Texas government, where let's say you've got a school district that is struggling with test scores. TEA won't leave them alone. Let's say the school board decides to say, you know what, we're not going to do state testing anymore. We're not going to do the STAR testing. We're not going to listen to TEA anymore. So we're just going to kind of do our own thing. What do y'all think would happen if a school district tried to do that? What do y'all think would happen? I mean, of course it would be on the news, right? But do you think that the school district would be able to get very far if they basically told the state that we're not going to do state testing? I mean, what do y'all think? I think this one's also pretty straightforward, right? That's why everyone's always so worried in the school districts during testing time, because the state has authority over them. Exactly, right? The state can shut them down and take over. This has happened before. That's going on in Houston ISD right now. There's I mean, I haven't kept up with that too closely, but I know that there's been, like, I know last summer there was news articles, and also there's been news articles recently about how, which I believe Houston ISD is the largest school district in the entire state, right? And they've been having so many problems. So TEA is basically, mediating and trying to provide them assistance. So, because the Texas Education Agency doesn't want to take over school districts, but they will have to if the school districts just aren't meeting the standards, right? So yeah, the states can also tell the local governments what to do. We've also saw that with the COVID pandemic, right, where local governments were subjected to Governor Abbott's executive orders and things like that. So counties and local government and cities, do not have the same the same leeway that states have against the federal government, right? However, there is an exemption though when it comes to the cities, right? This is called home rule. So the cities do get a little bit of freedom from the state, in that home rule is which power delegated by the state to a local government to manage its own affairs. You usually see this in cities, and this isn't for everything, right? Let me explain how home rule basically works. So home rule allows for cities to, once they come up with a city charter, it allows for the cities to determine how they're going to set up their administrative system. Like, I don't know if you all are familiar that like some cities have city managers, some of them don't. Mostly your bigger cities are going to have city managers. And a small city is not going to need a city manager because the mayor can handle the affairs of the city. But in a large city, yeah, you're usually going to have a city manager that is basically runs the city, and then the mayor oversees them, right? So, um, and then of course they also have cities will also have different systems in terms of how they set up their city council, right? Like some cities have city councils where they're voting. The vote for the council is based on districts, or they also have at-large elections where it's just the top vote getters get put on the city council. They also have different systems in place where some cities have the city council and the mayor on equal footing, where they're equals on the same level, and then you also have some cities where the city council is above the mayor. So again, you don't have to, I'm not saying that you have to memorize all that stuff, or no, I'm just giving you all some examples of how home rule can allow for cities to have some flexibility. And I'm just giving you all some examples of how that actually works out. However, in recent years, some state legislatures have been willing to preempt or remove laws, such as raising the minimum wage that were passed at the local level. So this actually has happened with the city of Austin. I know the city of Austin several years ago uh, was wanting to institute a city policy where all the businesses had to provide medical leave for like paid medical leave for anyone that worked in the city. But the Texas state legislature stepped in and did not allow for that. So the state legislatures can do that, especially when you have like a state legislature and a city that are of different political viewpoints, right? Like Austin is extremely liberal, but the state legislature is conservative. So you usually do see that, right? Or you might also see it the other way around, right? If you've got a conservative city and a more liberal state legislature, you'll also see the preemption, So yeah, again, as you probably have seen, politics is definitely something that really plays a big part in our everyday lives, and even ways that we might not necessarily even be aware of. But again, when you take Texas government, you'll learn more about you'll learn more about local government, county government, city government, as well as special district government here. Okay, so now we're going to get a little bit into the history of federalism here. So this is interesting, right? So when you look at the number of governmental entities in the United States, that's what this is saying, right? So we do have one national government, 50 states. We have 3,031 counties in the entire country. I don't know if you've ever thought of this in terms of looking to see, and these numbers are a little bit outdated because this is from the 2017 U.S. Census Bureau. So I'm sure the numbers have only gone up, right? I don't think we've lost governmental levels. I mean, I think that they've probably gone up here. But if you look at this is actually really interesting because, again, there was only one slide on local government, but have you noticed? Look how many examples of local government we have, right? I mean, pretty much local government is pretty much all of the types of governmental entities that we have, right? From county all the way down to special districts. This is all local government. So local government is extremely important. Don't let anyone tell you that local government is not important. It doesn't get the attention that the national government gets. I mean, oh goodness, there's news articles every day about what President Biden is up to, right? But do we have those articles about what the local school board is up to? I mean, no, we don't really have that, right? And so that's why people don't, that's one of the reasons why people don't really pay attention to these levels of government. But as you can see, almost all the different entities are at the local level, right? So municipalities are basically cities. Townships are like not officially cities, but they basically act like cities. They have some more restrictions than cities. Of course, we also have school districts, and then we also have even special districts, right? These are like irrigation districts, and people know these even less than the school districts, right? So there's all kinds of there's the irrigate. We have the irrigation district here, like we've got the agua dulce, water district and things like that. Uh, and nobody really knows what who they are or what they do, right? Because they don't get any attention, right? So again, that's more for Texas government, but I want for y'all to if any of y'all have ever stopped to think, hey, like how many entities of government do we have? This is a good table that shows that, and it shows that almost all of our government is at the local level, which is why local government is extremely important and should definitely be should definitely be in it should definitely be talked about a lot more. Okay, anyway, so let's go to kind of the federalism in practice. Like, so this is kind of like the history of federalism. So before the 1930s is the turning point. Um, States played a more active role in economic and social regulation compared to the federal government. So remember that at this time, the federal government is very small compared to the states. The states are doing a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to government. And we'll go more into detail on how that works. But it's not until the New Deal policies in response to the Great Depression, this is where we start to see the shift. So in the 1930s, under FDR, this is where we start to see that shift as the federal government becomes much larger and more powerful, right? So power shifted to the federal government following the New Deal response to the Great Depression. So we will talk more when we get to the New Deal about why that happened. Why did the federal government increase its power so much so to where now the federal government has a bunch more power than what it did back during the days of George Washington, even Abraham Lincoln. Since that time, the trend has been towards centralization of government power. However, states, aided by recent court decisions, have asserted themselves in certain policy areas, right? So what all this basically encompasses, this is like a quick summary of how federalism in America has shifted, right? That originally federalism started as that clear separation between the states and the federal government. That's called dual federalism. Then during the time of the New Deal policies, we shifted over to cooperative federalism, where the federal government and the states work together on these common goals and objectives, right? And so we've seen ever since the Great Depression that the federal government has expanded in power. We've seen more agencies, more regulation. There's just been a lot more governmental responsibility. This also coincides with the rise of like public administration studies. I've taken some public administration classes, and they talk about this. They talk about how government has gotten bigger because government has had more responsibilities. Government has added more to its plate, I guess you could say, right? So the meals are a lot bigger now because government has a lot more of this responsibility to do. So as long as they're exercising to compensate for all the food that they're eating, then that is kind of like what they're supposed to be doing, right? In terms of the way our government is set up. But we'll see also how the states have kind of pushed back against this. Okay, so let's begin from the beginning here. So dual federalism is a system of government in which most fundamental powers are shared between the federal and state governments. Okay, now, so again, this kind of, if you read this definition, you might say to yourself, hey, this sounds just like federalism itself, right? Well, again, this is the traditional form of federalism, which is what dual federalism is, right? This is the idea that the Constitution is very clear about what the states are responsible for doing and what the federal government is responsible for doing, right? So remember I showed you all this list, right? We talked about this last time, right? That this is under the traditional system, right? Now that's not to say that the states still don't have a lot of these powers, but originally when the Constitution was first written, these are the only real powers that the national government, that was listed in terms of what the national government was responsible for. Because all the rest of this is not listed in the Constitution, this is why the states and the local government have these responsibilities, right? So do keep that in mind. So under dual federalism, it is a fundamental part of the American system in which states did most of the governing. It gave the federal government exclusive control over some issues and states exclusive control over others, right? It prevailed for much of American history from 1789 to 1937. State-centered federalism is referred to as the traditional system. So this is what the framers originally intended to have in terms of this federalist arrangement between the states and the national government. So basically, what all this means here is that, again, I've said this before, right? That the national government does their things and the states do their things, and there's not really any overlap between the two. I like to compare dual federalism, and this is interesting, right? Because we just had the Super Bowl yesterday, right? I like to compare dual federalism to, if let's say you have a neighbor and you've got your fence separating your neighbors, right? Your house and your neighbor's house, right? But you never interact with your neighbors, right? You never talk to them, you never hang out with them. They're just doing their thing, you're doing theirs, and there's no interaction. And I'm sure some of y'all have had neighbors like that, right? Where you just kind of, they're your neighbors, but you don't really have a relationship with them, right? That's kind of how dual federalism is, right? Where you've got that fence that's separating what you're doing and what they're doing. That's how dual federalism is, right? And so in terms of let's talk a little bit about what are some of the reasons for this, right? And what were some of these what powers and responsibilities that the federal government have exclusively, and what powers do the states have? Which we've kind of mentioned this before, but we'll reiterate it again. So during the nation's first 140 years or so, the federal government was small. It dealt primarily with commerce. It included improvements like roads and protecting domestic industries with tariffs, and it emphasized the promotion and encouragement of economic development. Okay, that's the same thing, right? So basically, what this means here, everyone, is if we look at we'll come back to this right here, but I want to go back to the chart here. So look at the listings of the national government's responsibilities. Internal improvements. This is infrastructure. Providing subsidies, as well as tariffs. These taxes on imported goods. To promote domestic American-made products to be consumed and used instead of foreign things. The public land disposal. As well as patents. To be valid in all the 50 states, as well as currency, right? To make sure that all the states are using the same type of money here. Now, going back to what this all talks about, right? Going back to what this talks about, right? As you can see, the federal government dealt primarily with commerce, right? The federal government back then, their two main responsibilities were commerce and foreign policy. Basically, the only things that the federal government was responsible for back during the traditional system of federalism, dual federalism, were things that the states could not do themselves, because remember I talked about how that let's say you have a disagreement between two states, well, which law are you going to follow, right? Because they're both at the same level. So the federal government was responsible for issues and policies that affected all the states, right? So things like foreign policy, right? Maintaining, national defense, right? Maintaining a national currency, assisting with the infrastructure that goes through different states, right? Like the Erie Canal is a good example of this, right? So when it has to do with operations affecting multiple states, that's where that's what the federal government was responsible for under dual federalism. Let me take another swig of water. Because I want for you to understand why certain responsibilities were left up to the federal government and why other responsibilities were left up to the states, right? So all of these that we mentioned here, these all deal with all the states, right? These are issues that affect multiple states, right? So anything dealing with multiple states or interactions with foreign countries, so either interstate commerce or foreign policy, that's what the national government was responsible for at the time, right? So does that kind of make sense in terms of in terms of the protecting of the tariffs, right? Like I mentioned, right? Taxes are imported goods, so that you would encourage for Americans to buy local items, right? To buy things made in America, so that more of that money can stay locally and not send that money overseas, right? And of course, the promotion and encouragement of economic development. We'll talk about some of these cases here in a bit, like McCulloch v. Maryland and Give It to the Ogden, which allowed for the federal government to to allow for more of this economic development across the country here, right? So let's kind of skip over. Let's talk about the Commerce Clause, and then we'll come back to the states here, right? So the Commerce Clause enumerates powers of Congress, right? We talked about Article 1, Section 8. This of course is Congress's job description, but the Commerce Clause is really important. This basically is what gives, again, I've said this before, right? I don't want to say that this gives Congress almost unlimited power, because it's not unlimited, but this is what gives Congress pretty much the power that it has today, and it does have a lot of power, right? The Commerce Clause delegates to Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations amongst the several states and among the Indian tribes, right? So amongst the several states is a key, that's the key wordage right there, because it allows for the national government to engage in the regulation of commerce across the different states, right? So early Supreme Court rulings expanded federal power through its interpretation of the Commerce Clause, because the idea is, and I have some videos in the additional resources that talk about this, right? Is that the idea behind this is that what does commerce mean? Does commerce mean pretty much anything? Like what does this idea of commerce amongst the states mean, right? The Commerce Clause has been used as a means to, again, like I said before, this is where Congress gets their power to be able to pass legislation that does affect the states and that the states end up having to follow, right? And we'll talk more about, other examples like, regulations, like when it comes to like the environment, like the EPA, OSHA requirements, because we do see nowadays that there is a lot more federal government involvement in state and local affairs, and it goes back to this idea of the Commerce Clause, right? That all of these different actions that states and local governments are engaging in, that counts as commerce, right? So again, some people might not necessarily agree with this. Some people might feel that, and we will talk a little bit about how the Supreme Court has stepped in and has made some exceptions in terms of, saying that, a certain law that Congress passed does not count as commerce. But for the most part, the Supreme Court has basically, and for the most part, these courts have basically allowed for Congress to have this expanded power here, right? And some examples, of course, here are, and then we'll get back to the states right now. Some examples, of course, here was McCulloch v. Maryland and Gibbons v. Ogden. I've got some good videos that discuss these cases more in detail. McCulloch v. Maryland is interesting, right? Because this goes back to, and again, we'll talk about Marbury versus Madison later on, which was the case that gave the Supreme Court the power to engage in judicial review. But in 1819, the Supreme Court is already a fully functioning, branch of the federal government that basically acts as the referee, right? That interprets the laws and executive orders to ensure that they're constitutional. So McCulloch v. Maryland was an interesting case, right? Because this involved the creation of a national bank, which there had been plenty of controversy between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, right? The Federalists were in favor of it. Alexander Hamilton was in favor of a national bank. Thomas Jefferson was against it, and so it kind of went back and forth, right? So when Jefferson won the presidency, when he won the presidency in 1800, he was very adamant about undoing the national bank here, right? So it ruled. So basically, let's get to McCulloch v. Maryland, right, where the bank is reinstated. It's chartered in Maryland, right? So what they tried to do here was that they tried to tax the national bank here, right? Because the state of Maryland was issuing a tax to the national bank because Maryland was basically saying, okay, it's in our territory, so we have the right to tax it. So Mr. McCulloch, who was the cashier there at the national bank, was not going to pay that tax, and so it got to the Supreme Court, right? Because again, that's the point of the Supreme Court, right? Whenever there's a disagreement between the states and the federal government, the Supreme Court will step, the federal courts will step in, and then ultimately the Supreme Court will step in and decide, basically whose side is correct, right? So with that being said, the Supreme Court ruled in McCulloch v. Maryland, it ruled U.S. Congress had, through its implied powers, the legal right to charter a national bank. So if we remember from our discussion about in Article 1, Section 8, remember that Congress does have the ability to collect taxes, to raise money, right? They have money power, right? So the Supreme Court ruled that within that money power, that money power, that they could construct a national bank because it's related to those money powers that Congress has. The Constitution did not specifically say Congress has the right to charter a national bank, right? The Constitution is not that specific. But through the implied powers, you can make an inference that yes, that if Congress is going to carry out their duties when it comes to money, then that would make logical sense that if Congress wanted to create a national bank to assist with the money responsibilities that they have under the Constitution, that they would do so. So does that make sense in terms of that, because it's implied, that allowed for Congress to charter the national bank in the first place. Now, what's also important here is that this also goes to the supremacy clause that we also talked about before, right? It also ruled that any state law that conflicted with a federal law is invalid, right? So this is very clear, right? That Maryland, trying to tax, the national government is not possible, right? Because Maryland is below the national government, and so because they're a state, and so whenever there's that conflict, right, between whenever there's that conflict between the Constitution and state law, that the Constitution is always going to win out because the Constitution is the Constitution of all 50 states, right, as opposed to a Maryland law just being the law of an individual state here. So I know that's a little bit kind of convoluted. The video explains it also, more further here, but I wanted to just kind of explain that this allowed for Congress again to gain more power because now they also had the power to, to create this national bank and not have to worry about, the states basically, trying to, kind of, get in on that, right? Now, Gibbons v. Ogden is a different case, but it kind of deals with, it deals with a different situation, right? Where this was a situation where, and again, if I don't do a good job of explaining this, you can always watch the videos. The videos also go more into detail on this. This was a situation where the state of New York had instituted a monopoly on who could operate boats on the Hudson River. There, the Hudson River is the river that goes through New York City and goes up through upstate New York, right? Now, the Hudson River also borders other states, so that should be a clue here in terms of where you might think this might have ruled, right? So Gibbons and Ogden were disagreeing because one of them, was wanting to operate on the Hudson River because he had a license to operate that was issued by the federal government, but the federal government license violated the New York State monopoly. So again, there's another going back to the supremacy clause, right? So that's another problem, right? That New York could not issue that because that violated, that would violate the the federal law, right? So establish the supremacy of national government in all matters affecting interstate commerce, right? So the supremacy clause was used here again, basically saying that New York could not monopolize their riverways because that riverway, what was interstate because again it borders, different states there, right? So the New York law was struck down as unconstitutional, and this also allowed for the federal government to expand interstate commerce to also include, rivers and the navigation of the waterway, so to speak, right? So again, I again just understand that these are some important cases when it comes to how Congress is able to gain more power and the federal government is able to gain more power through the expansion of the Commerce Clause. And let's go back to the states here really quickly. So overall, states did most of the governing over citizens' day-to-day lives, like we mentioned in the chart here, right? That all of this, of course, all of these policies that the state has, they're in here because this is not mentioned in the Constitution, right? Whatever's, the 10th Amendment says that whatever's not, powers not specifically belonging to the federal government are automatically going to default to the state. So like we talked about before, that this is why the states have so many of these different powers and why any new powers that the government will be responsible for will ultimately go to the states here, right? Because since the Constitution was, written 250 years ago, they couldn't keep track with all the different innovations that might be happening. So, but anyway, with that being said, so this is why the states do most of the governing, right? When it comes to those police powers, right? The enforcement of the criminal code, civil code, as well as state regulations of industries and certifications, right? So American capitalism took form from state property and trespass laws and court decisions regarding contracts, markets, banking, and insurance. So again, we start to see more of the private sector really take the lead when it comes to industry and banking, and of course, and basically, all these different industries dealing with money, right? So insurance as well. So the states, of course, were responsible for regulating it, but we don't really see too much of this regulation, at least early on, right? Like we talked about before, we were talking about Abraham Lincoln, right? So dual federalism allowed slavery and all associated regulations to exist in some states, but not others, because slavery was looked at at least at the time, as a state issue, right? But again, there was a lot of disagreement about this, and of course, we would have the Civil War, which would basically make a ruling on this, right? So for 70 years after the Civil War, the court's interpretation of dual federalism favored business. Businesses enjoyed the benefits of national policies promoting commerce while also being shielded by the courts from policies that protected consumers and workers. So this is actually really interesting, right? So in federal government, we don't really go too much into the events that were going on during this time, but if you've taken history, then you'll definitely recall this as this being during the time of the Gilded Age, right? I mean, the Gilded Age, of course, was an important part of American history because this is where we started to see the rise of these millionaires, right? Such as J.P. Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller. We start to see the rise of the first American millionaires, right? And how they start to they really start to take control of some of these major industries, like U.S. Steel, right? Standard Oil, and they start to buy out their competition, and they start to really create these monopolies, so to speak, to where just a few people are owning entire industries, right? And this, of course, this would lead to Teddy Roosevelt and the trust busting and the progressivism that we would see also continue with Woodrow Wilson. But with that being said, what I want y'all to remember here specifically in terms of what's going on here at this time, and of course we also remember the labor strikes, right? You know, and all the union busting that was going on, right? So with that being said, the point I want to make here is that because the national government was promoting commerce and basically was catering to big business and these industries to basically have kind of take the lead of the businesses, because the businesses were making the argument that they knew best because they're in the business. This caused situations where, again, there wasn't really any regulation of business, right? You had situations where states, especially some of these states that were part of the Grange movement, were wanting to institute they wanted to institute minimum hour work weeks. They also wanted to institute minimum wages. They also wanted to institute, against child labor laws and also more safety in the workplace. This, of course, was also during the time of Upton Sinclair and the jungle, and how he wrote about, the unsafeness of the meat packing industry, right? And how, people were losing their hands and their limbs, right, to the machines, and just, because there wasn't any regulation, there was no OSHA back then. So this, of course, is kind of like the culmination of dual federalism. But then we start to see a change here, again, during the time of the Great Depression, right? So in 1937, the Supreme Court issued a series of decisions that expanded the federal government's power under the Commerce Clause, right? The court upheld acts of Congress that protected the rights of employees to organize and engage in collective bargaining, regulated the amount of farmland and cultivation, extended low-interest credit to small businesses and farmers, and restricted the activities of corporations dealing in the stock market. Okay, so this, of course, leads us to, again, this of course is in reaction to what happened during the Great Depression, right? So I guess we'll go ahead and pick this up next time, right? Yeah, because I don't necessarily want to start this, because this basically is coming to an end when it comes to the end of dual federalism. And so now we're going to start on cooperative federalism, right? So we're going to end that here for today, because I don't want to start cooperative federalism and then let's just kind of start it next time, right? So this is kind of a good stopping point here. So we'll go ahead and stop it here. We'll reiterate that again. We'll give some more examples of that here. So does anyone have any other questions or comments before we leave for today? Anything else that you all have questions on? Did today kind of make sense in terms of, I guess we focused mostly on the dual federalism, right? That's what we focused on mostly today. So did anyone have any other questions or anything like that before we leave here? Jesse, go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to verify. You said that Chapter 3 quiz that was due on Wednesday is going to be moved to like next week or something?
Yes, the one that was due this Wednesday is going to be moved because we should finish by Wednesday, but I figured that it would be best that I give you all that extra time, right? So that way you all can kind of read through what we're going to cover on Wednesday and kind of prepare yourself for the quiz. Does that kind of make sense, or what do you all think? Yeah, Linda says yes, thank you. Yeah, I think that'd be best. Go ahead, Linda, go ahead. You're gonna say something?
Yeah, thank you for the time, extension on that. Appreciate it.
Yes, you're welcome. Especially because this chapter, again, is a little more difficult than some of the other chapters, so I feel that you all would benefit from a little bit extra time. So yeah, that's fine. We'll just yeah, the Chapter 3 quiz is not going to be due this Wednesday. It'll be due next Wednesday, and we should be able to finish federalism by Wednesday. So we should be good on that. So okay. Any other questions y'all have? Anything else? Anything else, everyone? Nothing else? Okay. All right. Well then. Okay. All right. Well then, we'll see you all on Wednesday then. Okay. So yes, Linda, you take care. Be safe, and hopefully today made sense. We'll pick up on cooperative federalism next time. Okay. So y'all take care and have a good rest of your day. And thankfully it's warming up a bit. So y'all take care, everyone. Thank you. You too. Thank you, Hazel. Thank you.